Mr. Whitmore, why are you pretending not to see her? Evie's small voice cut through the glittering ballroom just as the giant projector behind the stage flickered alive. Jonathan turned sharply, his champagne glass freezing halfway to his lips. Across the crowded fundraiser, a little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit while a man in a dark suit slowly moved toward her through the blackout. Snow hammered the glass ceiling overhead. Somewhere near the service doors, someone screamed. Then Evie grabbed Jonathan's hand and pulled him straight toward the place he had spent years avoiding. And somehow, all of it had started 3 nights earlier, beneath a freezing Manhattan sky outside the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Evie Brooks hated standing near the front entrance because rich people almost never looked down. They looked at their phones, their watches, the long black cars waiting by the curb. Never at the kids selling handmade bracelets beside the subway stairs. Especially not at a skinny black girl in a faded coat with wet sneakers and a backpack held together by silver tape. That night, the wind blew hard enough to sting her ears, but Evie stayed anyway. Her grandmother's electricity bill sat folded in her pocket with final notice stamped in red across the top. She needed $32 more before morning. Still, every time someone dropped cash into her paper cup, she separated $1 quietly into another pocket for her little brother's field trip next week. The city smelled like snow and exhaust and roasted chestnuts from the food cart on 52nd Street. Across the avenue, cameras flashed outside the Whitmore Grand, where New York's wealthiest donors gathered beneath gold lights and towering Christmas wreaths. Jonathan Whitmore's name glowed across the entrance in giant white letters. Evie recognized him immediately. Everybody did. Billionaire developer. Widow. The man who rebuilt half of Manhattan after Hurricane Sandy and somehow still looked lonely in every photo. Around 8:17 p.m. the crying started. Soft at first. Easy to miss beneath the traffic. Evie looked toward the side gate and spotted a little girl no older than 6 hugging a stuffed rabbit under the security awning. No coat. Pink tights. Tiny dress shoes already soaked from slush. Adults passed her without slowing down. One woman even stepped around her like she was part of the sidewalk. Evie waited for somebody to stop. Nobody did. The little girl kept whispering the same thing through chattering teeth. My mommy said wait here. A black SUV idled across the street with its headlights off. Evie noticed because the driver never looked at his phone once. He just watched the hotel entrance. Something about that made her stomach tighten. Then the hotel doors opened and Jonathan Whitmore stepped outside surrounded by assistants, security, and camera flashes. He looked exhausted already, like he wanted the whole night over before it began. Evie didn't think. She crossed the street before fear could stop her. One of the guards moved to block her, but she slipped past him and grabbed Jonathan's wrist with freezing fingers. The entire line of people froze in shock. Evie pointed toward the crying little girl near the gate. Then she pointed across the street toward the dark SUV. Sir, she whispered, breathing hard. That man keeps watching her, but he looks scared of whoever left her here. Jonathan Whitmore did not pull his hand away right away. That was the first strange thing. Snow melted slowly against the sleeve of his tailored black coat, while Evie's tiny fingers stayed wrapped around his wrist. Around them, cameras kept flashing, but the billionaire no longer looked toward them. He looked at the crying girl by the gate instead. For one suspended second, the city noise seemed far away. Then someone shouted his name from the hotel steps, and the spell broke. Sir, the board is waiting upstairs, one assistant urged nervously. Jonathan barely nodded. His eyes stayed fixed on the little girl shivering beneath the security awning. The child's stuffed rabbit hung upside down from one arm, its yellow ribbon fluttering weakly in the wind. Evie noticed something adults missed immediately. The girl wasn't crying loudly anymore. She kept glancing toward the dark SUV across the street between breaths, like she was checking whether it was still there. She's scared of the car, Evie whispered. Jonathan frowned slightly. What car? Evie pointed again. But this time, the SUV's headlights suddenly switched on. The engine growled softly. Then the vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared into midtown traffic before any guard could react. Marcus Reed, Jonathan's longtime driver, cursed under his breath and stepped toward the street. You want me to follow it? He asked quietly. Jonathan hesitated too long. By the time he answered, the SUV was gone. The little girl near the gate began coughing hard from the cold. Jonathan looked down at Evie for the first time fully, as if realizing she was more than a random child who crossed his path. Her braids were damp with snow. One glove had a hole near the thumb. She looked exhausted, but she never once asked him for money. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evie." "And where are your parents?" The question landed awkwardly. Evie stared at the slush near her shoes before answering. "My grandma says people ask that when they don't know what else to say." Jonathan blinked, caught off guard by how calm she sounded. Nearby, guests continued entering the gala under gold lights and velvet ropes, pretending not to stare. One woman murmured something about street kids ruining the event. Jonathan heard it. So did Evie. Neither replied. Instead, Evie walked toward the crying girl first. That was the second strange thing. She approached her slowly, kneeling without fear despite the freezing pavement soaking through her jeans. "Hey," Evie said softly. "Did your mommy tell you her name?" The little girl nodded weakly. "Lila." "Okay, Lila," Evie whispered. "You don't gotta stand out here alone anymore." Jonathan felt something tighten unexpectedly in his chest. Lila lifted the stuffed rabbit closer as if protecting it. Its worn yellow ribbon caught Jonathan's attention again. Not because of the color this time, because stitched into one corner, almost hidden beneath the frayed fabric, were tiny silver initials he recognized instantly. A W, his late wife's initials. Jonathan stepped closer without realizing he was moving. Then Lila looked up at him with frightened eyes and asked quietly, "Did my mommy know your wife?" Jonathan noticed the rabbit first, but Evie noticed Lila's hands. The little girl kept rubbing her thumb over the same spot on the rabbit's yellow ribbon again and again, like she was checking whether something hidden was still there. Most adults would have missed it. Evie didn't. Snow drifted sideways through the open driveway while guests hurried into the warmth of the hotel lobby. Somewhere above them, a string quartet played soft Christmas music that sounded strangely distant against the wind. Lila lowered her eyes after asking about Jonathan's wife, as if she already regretted saying it. Jonathan stared at the stitched initials on the ribbon. A W. Amelia Whitmore. His wife had been gone almost 6 years, yet suddenly her initials were sitting in the hands of a freezing child outside his hotel. "Where did you get that rabbit?" he asked quietly. Lila's grip tightened instantly. "My mommy said not to let people take it." Jonathan softened his tone. "I'm not taking it." Evie watched his face carefully. For the first time since she had seen him arrive, the billionaire no longer looked irritated. He looked unsettled. That difference mattered. Before anyone could say more, the revolving doors opened sharply behind them. Warm light spilled across the snow. Vanessa Hale stepped outside wearing a cream-colored coat and diamond earrings that caught every camera flash around the entrance. 2 board members followed close behind her. "Jonathan," she said smoothly, though her smile faltered the moment she saw Lila. It happened fast. Too fast for most people to notice. But Evie saw Vanessa freeze for half a second at the sight of the rabbit. Then came the second thing. Vanessa looked directly at Lila and said softly, "There you are, Lily." Lila immediately stepped backward until her shoulder touched Evie's arm. "That's not my name," she whispered. The air changed. Jonathan noticed it too. Vanessa recovered quickly with a practiced laugh. "Oh goodness, I'm sorry, sweetheart. You just reminded me of someone." But her voice sounded thinner now, less polished. Evie glanced toward Jonathan. He was still watching Vanessa, and suddenly the giant hotel entrance no longer felt warm or glamorous. Felt tight, careful, like everyone had started measuring every word. "Do you know her?" Jonathan asked. Vanessa folded her gloves slowly before answering. "No, of course not." Yet her eyes dropped immediately toward the rabbit again. Not the child, the rabbit. Evie's stomach tightened. She remembered the dark SUV leaving the curb the second Jonathan walked over. She remembered Lila checking the street every few seconds. And now this woman who supposedly knew nothing kept staring at the toy like it carried something dangerous. One of the board members leaned closer to Jonathan. The donors are waiting upstairs. Jonathan barely reacted. Vanessa gently extended her hand toward Lila. Sweetheart, why don't we get you inside somewhere warm? Lila didn't move. Instead, she whispered something so softly only Evie heard it. Mommy said don't go with the lady from the pictures. Evie's eyes lifted immediately toward Vanessa. At that exact moment, a hotel employee hurried through the lobby doors carrying a framed charity photograph toward storage. The glass caught the light just long enough for Evie to see Vanessa standing beside Amelia Whitmore in the picture. And beside them, almost hidden near the edge of the frame, stood a younger Rachel Pierce holding the very same rabbit. Rich people always say somewhere warm like that fixes everything. Evie said it quietly, not rude, not mocking, just honest enough to stop Jonathan mid-step. Snow swirled beneath the hotel lights while security finally opened the side entrance for them. Jonathan looked down at her, surprised again by how little fear she seemed to carry around powerful people. Most adults around him chose their words carefully. Evie didn't. Inside the service lobby, heat rushed over them in waves, smelling faintly of pine decorations and expensive perfume. Lila stood close beside Evie now, clutching the rabbit against her chest. The little girl still refused to go near Vanessa, who lingered near the revolving doors speaking in hushed tones with hotel staff. Jonathan noticed Vanessa checking her phone repeatedly. Not nervous exactly. Waiting. A waiter passed carrying silver. Trays stacked with miniature desserts worth more than most people's dinners. Evie stared for half a second before quickly looking away. Jonathan caught it anyway. You hungry? He asked. Evie shrugged like it didn't matter. My grandma says food tastes better when people offer it because they care. Jonathan unexpectedly found himself speechless. Before he could answer, Lila suddenly tugged Evie's sleeve hard. Not him, she whispered. Evie turned. Near the elevators, a tall hotel employee in a dark security jacket stood watching them too closely. The man looked away the second Jonathan noticed him. Something felt off immediately. The jacket was almost right. Same color, same logo, but the hotel crest was stitched crooked near the shoulder. Jonathan started toward the man instinctively. The employee turned and disappeared through a staff hallway before security could stop him. Marcus moved fast after him, disappearing around the corner. Vanessa approached seconds later, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Jonathan, this has gone far enough, she said gently, though tension pressed beneath every word. The child should be with professionals now. Lila stepped behind Evie again. Jonathan crossed his arms. Funny, he replied quietly. She doesn't seem to feel very safe around professionals. Vanessa's expression tightened only briefly. Then she smiled toward Lila again. Sweetheart, nobody here wants to hurt you. Lila's fingers trembled against the rabbit's ribbon. Evie noticed something tiny then. Vanessa wore a silver charm bracelet under her coat sleeve. One charm was missing. Not broken. Missing. The empty clasp swayed softly whenever she moved her hand. Evie glanced down at the rabbit, then back at the bracelet. Her stomach tightened. Before she could think it through, she blurted softly, Did you lose an angel? Silence landed instantly. Vanessa's eyes snapped toward her. Too fast. Too sharp. Jonathan noticed. So did Marcus as he returned from the hallway alone. Guy vanished, Marcus muttered quietly near Jonathan's shoulder. Like he knew the building already. The Christmas music floating through the lobby suddenly sounded thin and distant. Somewhere upstairs, the gala crowd erupted into applause for something none of them downstairs could see. Vanessa tucked her bracelet beneath her sleeve immediately. I think this little girl's imagination is running wild, she said coolly. But Evie kept staring at the empty clasp. She remembered the silver angel charm buried in slush outside, the one with dried blood near the hinge. Jonathan looked between Vanessa and the frightened child beside Evie. Something invisible had shifted. Not proof yet, but enough to make the room feel smaller. Then Lila quietly leaned closer to Evie's ear and whispered words that made Evie's face lose color instantly. My mommy said the lady gets angry when people find the missing things. The fire alarm suddenly screamed through the hotel lobby. Every chandelier trembled with the sharp metallic pulse as startled guests turned toward the ceiling in confusion. For one fractured second, nobody moved. Then the entire floor erupted into noise. Security rushed toward the ballroom entrances. Staff members shouted over one another. Somewhere upstairs, heels pounded across marble. Jonathan instinctively stepped closer to Lila and Evie while Marcus scanned the crowd. "That's not scheduled," Marcus muttered. Vanessa's face lost color for the first time all night. Not panic exactly. Recognition. Evie noticed it immediately. Lila grabbed Evie's sleeve so tightly, her knuckles turned pale beneath the cold. "She gets mad when alarms happen," the little girl whispered. Jonathan heard that one. His eyes flicked sharply toward Vanessa. Why would she say that? Vanessa forced out a laugh too quickly. "She's frightened. Children say strange things under stress." But she kept checking the elevators instead of the child. That detail sat wrong in Jonathan's chest. The fire alarm continued blaring while guests flooded toward the exits wrapped in fur coats and irritation. Nobody noticed the little girl trembling beside the service desk except Evie. She knelt beside Lila again. "Hey," she said softly. "Look at me, not them." Lila tried. Her breathing still shook. Then Evie saw something else. A folded paper was sticking halfway out from beneath. The rabbit's torn seam. Tiny. Almost invisible between the stuffing and ribbon. Evie's heartbeat jumped. Before she could reach for it, footsteps approached fast. "Vanessa." Evie reacted without thinking. She hugged Lila suddenly, hiding the rabbit between them just as Vanessa crouched beside the girls. "Sweetheart," Vanessa said to Lila carefully, "I know tonight feels scary." Her voice sounded warm. Her eyes didn't. "But I can help you." Lila buried her face against Evie's shoulder instead of answering. Jonathan watched the exchange closely now. Too closely. Vanessa rose smoothly again. But as she stood, something slipped briefly from her coat pocket onto the marble floor. A white keycard. Marcus picked it up before anyone else noticed. "Storage level?" he murmured, reading the faded label. Vanessa snatched it back instantly. "Old access card," she replied. "Nothing important." But her fingers tightened hard around it. The alarm finally cut off. Silence crashed down afterward, almost louder than the noise itself. In that sudden stillness, Evie carefully slipped her hand beneath the rabbit's torn seam while everyone watched Vanessa and Jonathan stare each other down. Her fingertips brushed folded paper. She slowly pulled it free. Not paper. A receipt. Crumpled and damp. She unfolded it just enough to glimpse a printed address near the bottom. Albany Children's Transit Shelter. Dated 2 days ago. Before Evie could read more, a security guard hurried toward Jonathan. "Sir," he said urgently, lowering his voice. "We found someone trying to access the surveillance room upstairs." Marcus immediately turned toward the elevators again. Jonathan's expression hardened. Vanessa looked away too fast. Then Evie noticed one final thing. Lila wasn't looking at the adults anymore. She was staring across the lobby toward the giant Christmas tree near the ballroom entrance. Someone stood partly hidden behind it, watching them. The same crooked hotel security patch gleamed beneath the twinkling lights. And this time, before disappearing into the crowd, the man slowly raised one finger to his lips like a warning aimed directly at Lila. The hotel grew strangely quiet after the alarm. Stopped. Not silent exactly. Just muted like the building itself was listening. Snow drifted against the tall lobby windows while workers reset overturned velvet ropes and nervous guests returned upstairs pretending the interruption had meant nothing. Jonathan stood near the Christmas tree with one hand in his coat pocket, staring at the damp receipt Evie had slipped him moments earlier. Albany Children's Transit Shelter. The words sat heavily in his palm. Marcus had gone to review security footage again, and Vanessa had disappeared upstairs with the board members. For the first time all night, Jonathan was alone with the children. That realization unsettled him more than he expected. Nearby, Evie sat cross-legged on the marble floor helping Lila retie the yellow ribbon around the rabbit's neck. Her small fingers moved carefully despite the cold still clinging to them. "You do that a lot," Jonathan said quietly before realizing he had spoken out loud. Evie glanced up. "Do what?" "Fix things that aren't yours." She shrugged once. "Somebody should." The answer landed softly, but Jonathan felt it anyway. Lila leaned sleepily against Evie's shoulder, finally calmer now that Vanessa was gone. The child looked exhausted in the way only frightened children do, too tired to fully rest. Jonathan loosened his tie slightly and sat across from them near the tree. He had not sat on a lobby floor in decades. Evie noticed that too. "You don't gotta stay," she said. "People like you usually leave once things get messy." Jonathan almost answered automatically. Meetings, investors, damage control. Instead, he looked toward the giant ballroom staircase where donors laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, as if the world downstairs did not exist. "Maybe that's the problem," he admitted quietly. Evie studied him for a second longer than most adults ever dared. Then she pulled something from Lila's rabbit carefully. A tiny silver thread had come loose near the seam. "This wasn't sewn by a machine," she said absent-mindedly. "Somebody fixed it by hand more than once." Jonathan's chest tightened unexpectedly. Amelia used to repair toys exactly that way during foundation drives, refusing to throw damaged things away. He remembered teasing her about spending hours stitching old stuffed animals instead of buying new ones. "Kids remember what gets repaired," she used to tell him. The memory hit harder than he expected. Across the lobby, a janitor quietly vacuumed melted snow from the carpet. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. Then Evie asked something strange without looking up. "Why would somebody move kids to Albany if they already got homes here?" Jonathan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Evie pointed at the receipt. "Transit shelters are for moving people somewhere else, right?" Jonathan stared at the paper again. Earlier, he had only seen a shelter name. Now he noticed something else printed near the bottom corner. Transfer authorization code. His jaw tightened. Before he could think further, Lila suddenly stirred against Evie's shoulder. Half asleep, she whispered softly into the rabbit's fur. "Mommy said the trains were safer than the vans." Jonathan looked up sharply. Evie did too. "What vans?" Jonathan asked gently, but Lila's eyes were already drifting closed again. The little girl barely seemed aware she had spoken. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the hotel, a freight elevator door slammed shut with a heavy metallic echo. Marcus's voice burst through Jonathan's earpiece a second later, low and urgent. "Boss, you need to come downstairs right now. We found something in the surveillance room, and I don't think Vanessa wanted anyone seeing it." The surveillance room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and overheated electronics. One monitor near the back wall flickered with static while Marcus stood frozen beside it, his face tighter than Jonathan had seen in years. "Tell me this camera's wrong," Marcus muttered without looking away from the screen. Jonathan stepped closer immediately. Evie followed more slowly, keeping Lila's hand tucked inside hers. On the monitor, grainy black and white footage showed the side gate from earlier that evening. Snow drifted sideways across the frame. Guests passed in blurred streaks of expensive coats and umbrellas. Then the footage rewound. Marcus slowed it carefully. A woman appeared carrying Lila toward the gate. Rachel Pierce. Her face looked thinner than in the charity photo downstairs. Tired. Frightened. She knelt briefly beside Lila before hurrying away. Jonathan leaned closer. "Pause it there." Marcus froze the frame. Rachel's hand rested on the rabbit's yellow ribbon, and wrapped around her wrist was a hospital identification band. Not recent. Faded. Evie noticed something else first. "Zoom in on the corner," she whispered. Marcus enlarged the far edge of the frame. A second figure stood half-hidden beneath the awning near the loading dock. Tall, wearing the crooked security patch, watching Rachel the entire time. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Can you identify him?" Marcus shook his head. "Face is blocked." Then the footage jumped suddenly. Static cracked across the screen. When the image returned, Rachel was gone. But Lila remained standing alone at the gate exactly where Evie had first seen her. Jonathan felt a coldness settle beneath his ribs. This had not been abandonment. Rachel had left fast because she believed someone was coming. "Run the next 30 seconds, Jonathan ordered quietly. Marcus obeyed. The fake security guard moved toward Lila slowly. Then, unexpectedly, the footage stopped again. Not static this time. Manual interruption. Someone had cut the recording remotely. Marcus cursed under his breath. That requires internal clearance. The room fell silent. Evie looked toward the hallway instinctively. The surveillance room door stood slightly open. Anyone passing outside could hear them. Before she could warn Jonathan, footsteps approached. Vanessa. Evie reacted instantly. She grabbed the nearest clipboard from the desk and shoved it toward Jonathan just as Vanessa entered. "I found this downstairs," Evie blurted loudly, pretending excitement. Jonathan caught on half a second later. Vanessa's eyes swept across the room suspiciously. Marcus casually minimized the security footage. "Everything all right?" Vanessa asked too smoothly. "Fine, Jonathan answered. Minor system glitch." Vanessa studied him carefully. Then her gaze drifted toward Lila. "Not warm. Measuring. Poor thing looks exhausted," she murmured. "There's a private suite upstairs where she could rest safely." Lila tightened her grip around Evie's hand immediately. Jonathan noticed. So did Vanessa. Something dangerous flickered beneath her polished expression before disappearing again. "We're fine here," Jonathan replied. Vanessa held his eyes one beat too long before leaving. The second the door shut, Marcus reopened the footage. Evie exhaled slowly. "She knew," the girl whispered. Jonathan frowned. "Knew what?" Evie pointed toward the paused frame of Rachel kneeling beside Lila. "That somebody inside this hotel was watching." Jonathan stared again at the frozen image. Rachel's frightened face, the fake guard, the cut footage. Then his eyes shifted lower for the first time. On the loading dock wall behind Rachel, partly hidden beneath falling snow, someone had spray-painted a faded sunflower symbol beside a freight elevator number. Evie's expression changed instantly. "I've seen that flower before," she whispered softly. "On the envelope Rachel tried to give me." The surveillance monitors went black all at once. Every screen, every camera feed. 1 second the loading dock flickered beneath falling snow, and the next the entire wall dissolved into darkness. Marcus straightened instantly. "That's not a glitch," he snapped. Somewhere beyond the surveillance room, the hotel lights dimmed for half a breath before stabilizing again. Jonathan's pulse hardened. Someone inside the building had realized they were looking too closely. Lila flinched at the sudden blackout, clutching the rabbit tighter against her chest. Evie moved beside her immediately. "Don't look at the screens," she whispered softly. "Look at me." But Evie herself couldn't stop staring at the dead monitors. The silence inside the room felt wrong now. Heavy. "Watched." Marcus typed rapidly across the keyboard, trying to restore the feeds. "Remote override," he muttered. "Whoever did this has executive access." Jonathan turned toward the hallway at once. "Lock this room down." Before Marcus could respond, footsteps thundered somewhere outside. Fast. Not security patrols. Running. The sound passed the surveillance room door and disappeared deeper into the service corridor. Then came the elevator chime. Evie's eyes widened first. "The loading dock," she whispered. Jonathan moved instantly. The four of them hurried through the narrow service hallway while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Hotel noise faded behind them with every step. The deeper level smelled colder, industrial, faintly metallic beneath the holiday perfume drifting down from upstairs. Lila suddenly stopped walking. Hard. Her small sneakers squeaked against the concrete floor. "No," she whispered. "No vans." Jonathan crouched slightly beside her. "Lila, what is it?" But the child only stared toward the loading area ahead, where 2 freight elevators stood open beneath flickering lights. One elevator was empty. The other held a rolling cart stacked with plain white boxes. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then Evie noticed the labels. Child relocation supplies. Her stomach twisted. Why would they keep those down here? She asked quietly. No one answered immediately. Marcus stepped toward the cart carefully. One of the boxes had already been sliced open. Inside were dozens of identical wristbands like the one Rachel wore in the footage. Jonathan picked one up slowly. Each band carried a printed transfer number instead of a child's name. The realization hit him visibly. These weren't medical tags. They were tracking labels. Suddenly a loud crash echoed somewhere farther inside the loading dock. Metal against concrete. Marcus drew a sharp breath and moved ahead while Jonathan instinctively pulled the children back behind him. The sound came again. Closer this time. Then silence. Evie noticed something tiny near the freight elevator door. A silver charm. Another angel. But this one was snapped clean in half. She bent quickly to pick it up before anyone stepped on it. The broken edge was fresh, like it had happened only minutes ago. Jonathan, Marcus called sharply from deeper inside the dock. His voice sounded wrong now. Tight. Jonathan hurried toward him. Evie followed despite herself. Near the far wall, beside a line of parked service vans, Marcus stood staring at something taped to the driver's side window of a black transport vehicle. A photograph. Jonathan froze the second he saw it. It was security footage printed from earlier that night. A grainy image of Evie standing beside Lila outside the hotel gates. Across the bottom, someone had written 3 words in thick black marker. She saw too much. Then, before anyone could speak, one of the parked vans suddenly roared to life behind them. That's not the same van. Evie said it quietly, but the words cut straight through the loading dock chaos. The engine behind them continued rumbling while Marcus shoved Jonathan and the girls away from the reversing vehicle. Tires screeched sharply against wet concrete. Then the van shot forward and disappeared through the open service gate into the snowy alley beyond the hotel. Security guards came running too late. Jonathan barely noticed them. He was staring at the transport label still clutched in his hand, while Evie looked toward the empty parking space the van had left behind. The logo's different, she whispered again. Marcus frowned. What? Evie pointed toward the remaining service vans lined against the wall. Those have blue numbers near the mirrors. The one that left had red. Jonathan's eyes narrowed instantly. Such a tiny difference. Easy to miss unless someone spent their life noticing details because adults rarely did. Marcus walked quickly to the nearest parked van and checked the registration sticker inside the windshield. His face hardened immediately. These belong to Whitmore Foundation Logistics, he muttered. But the one that left, he stopped. Jonathan stepped closer. What? Marcus looked back slowly. Private contractor. No official record tied to the company. The meaning settled heavily into the cold air. The fake guard. The missing footage. The tracking bands. The transport vans. Suddenly the entire story shifted shape. This was never just about stolen money hidden inside a charity foundation. Children themselves had become part of whatever operation was happening beneath Jonathan's company name. Lila began trembling harder beside Evie. No vans, she whispered again. Mommy hated the red ones. Jonathan crouched carefully in front of her. Lila, did Rachel ever take you in one? The little girl shook her head violently. Tears welled in her eyes. She ran away with me. Silence crashed down around them. Even Marcus stopped moving. Evie looked at Jonathan first because she saw the exact moment the truth landed. Rachel had not abandoned Lila outside the hotel. She had been trying to hide her there. Hide her somewhere public. Somewhere close to the one person she still believed might stop this. Jonathan Whitmore himself. The realization hollowed something inside him. Upstairs, donors still laughed beneath crystal chandeliers, while children were being moved through hidden loading docks beneath his own buildings. Evie slowly unfolded the crumpled photo taped to the van window again. She stared longer this time. Wait, she whispered. Jonathan looked over her shoulder. At first it seemed like the same grainy image from outside the hotel. Then he noticed what Evie had noticed. The photo wasn't taken from the hotel security system. The angle was wrong. Higher. Closer. Someone had been watching them from outside long before they entered the building. This wasn't printed tonight, Evie said softly. One corner of the paper had already begun fading from repeated folds. Marcus took the photo carefully and turned it over. His expression darkened immediately. On the back was a handwritten timestamp from 3 days earlier. Jonathan's stomach dropped. 3 days. Before Rachel disappeared. Before Evie ever touched his wrist outside the gala. Which meant someone had already been watching Evie before she even met him. Lila suddenly tugged Jonathan's coat sleeve with shaking fingers. Mommy said if the man with the sad eyes finally believed us. Her voice cracked softly. We were supposed to go downstairs. Jonathan stared at her. Downstairs where? But before Lila could answer, every freight elevator in the loading dock suddenly powered on at once. One by one, the metal doors began sliding open by themselves. Jonathan stepped into the opening freight elevator before anyone could stop him. The metal doors groaned apart while cold fluorescent light spilled across the loading dock floor. Marcus grabbed his arm immediately. Boss, we don't know what's down there. Jonathan pulled free without looking back. That stopped mattering the second children got involved. His voice sounded different now. Harder. Focused. Not the polished billionaire from the gala upstairs. Evie noticed it instantly. So did Marcus. For the first time all night, Jonathan Whitmore looked like a man choosing something instead of avoiding it. Lila clung to Evie's hand as the elevator descended beneath the hotel. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Pipes rattled somewhere inside the walls. Above them, faint Christmas music still leaked through the ceiling speakers, warped and distant underground. When the doors finally opened, silence waited for them. Not empty silence. Prepared silence. The underground level stretched wider than Jonathan expected, lined with old storage rooms and concrete corridors beneath the hotel foundation. Most lights were off. One hallway glowed dimly at the far end. Marcus moved ahead cautiously. This level isn't on public building plans, he muttered. Jonathan frowned. What is it supposed to be? Storage, originally. Marcus scanned the dark corridors. But somebody renovated parts of it recently. Evie stepped out last with Lila beside her. Then she stopped suddenly. Wait! Everyone turned. Evie pointed toward the floor near the elevator tracks. Tiny silver glitter sparkled beneath the overhead lights. Jonathan crouched slightly. Not glitter. Craft sequins shaped like stars. One stuck to the sole of his shoe. Lila's eyes widened. Rachel had those, she whispered. Jonathan looked deeper into the hallway immediately. The sequins continued faintly along the floor like breadcrumbs. Small enough most adults would never notice. Evie followed them first. She wanted somebody to find her, the girl said softly. The sentence landed hard in the cold underground space. Halfway down the corridor, they reached a locked steel door marked Archive B. Jonathan tried the handle. Locked electronically. Then Evie noticed something taped beside the keypad. A faded child sticker shaped like a sunflower. The same symbol from the loading dock wall. Rachel did that too, Lila whispered. Jonathan's chest tightened. Rachel had been leaving signs intentionally, not random panic. A trail. Marcus connected a portable override device to the keypad while Jonathan checked his phone. No signal underground. Another detail he did not like. Done, Marcus said quietly. The lock clicked open. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched through the room beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Cardboard archive boxes covered folding tables. Some carried foundation logos. Others had no labels at all. Jonathan opened the nearest cabinet and froze instantly. Hundreds of child intake forms. Transfer numbers. Transit schedules. Photographs. Dates. Some pages carried signatures from departments inside his own company. Evie slowly approached another table. Her eyes narrowed at something sitting near the edge beneath a dusty desk lamp. Jonathan, she whispered carefully. He turned. On the table sat an old framed photograph partially hidden beneath folders. Jonathan stepped closer slowly. The picture showed Amelia Whitmore smiling beside several children during an outreach event years ago. Rachel Pierce stood beside her holding art supplies. But Jonathan barely noticed them. His attention locked onto the tall man standing blurred in the background near the transport van outside the photo. Crooked security patch. Same posture. Same silhouette. Jonathan stared at the image, pulse slowing into something colder than fear. Then Marcus opened another file folder nearby and quietly said words that changed the room completely. "Boss, these transfer records are still active. Somebody used this system tonight." Evie noticed the dates before anyone noticed the names. Rows of transfer files covered the table beneath the flickering archive lights. But one detail felt wrong immediately. The paperwork wasn't old. Some forms had been printed less than 48 hours earlier. "Jonathan," she said softly, sliding one folder closer. "Why would they still be making new ones if Rachel already got caught?" Jonathan took the file from her hand. His expression shifted instantly. The transfer listed a scheduled relocation for a child moved through Whitmore Outreach Services the very same night as the gala. Destination: pending. Guardian pending. Child name withheld. Marcus opened another cabinet fast. More fresh files. Fresh signatures. Whatever the system was, it had not stopped after Rachel disappeared. It was still operating beneath the hotel while wealthy donors drank champagne upstairs. Lila slowly backed away from the cabinets. "Mommy said they changed names a lot," she whispered. Jonathan looked toward her carefully. "Who changed names?" Lila hesitated. Fear crossed her face. Then she pointed toward the stacks of folders. "The people in the offices." A cold silence settled over the room. Jonathan had spent years believing corruption inside his foundation meant stolen money. Inflated contracts, fake outreach numbers. Something ugly but distant. Now the files suggested something far worse. Children themselves were being processed like paperwork. Evie moved deeper into the archive room before anyone could stop her. "These pictures don't match," she said suddenly. Jonathan turned. She stood beside a wall covered in intake photographs clipped beside transfer schedules. Most children looked frightened or confused, but several photos repeated. Same child, different name underneath each image. Jonathan stepped closer slowly. "That's impossible." Marcus compared two files side by side. Same little boy, same scar above the eyebrow. Different identities assigned 6 months apart. The realization hit all three adults at once. These weren't isolated relocations. The system was recycling children through multiple identities. The room seemed colder now. Evie reached toward another folder near the bottom of the cabinet. A faded sunflower sticker marked the edge. "Rachel touched this one," she said quietly. Inside sat an incomplete intake file with no transfer destination listed. Instead, attached to the back was a handwritten note. Not official paperwork. Personal. Jonathan recognized Amelia's handwriting immediately. "Never move children without direct family verification." His breath caught slightly. Amelia had written it years ago as one of the Foundation's strictest rules after a trafficking case in Queens. Someone had clipped her warning directly onto a violated transfer file. Like a joke. Evie studied Jonathan carefully then. "Your wife knew something bad could happen," she said softly. Jonathan didn't answer, because suddenly another possibility was forming inside his mind. Not just that Amelia suspected corruption, but that Rachel might have gone to the gala intentionally because she believed Jonathan himself never knew the system still existed under his company. Marcus suddenly stiffened near the back wall. "Boss!" He held up a thin personnel folder pulled from beneath a stack of invoices. Jonathan crossed the room quickly. The file belonged to a former logistics coordinator terminated 5 years earlier after Amelia's death. The employee photo was grainy but recognizable instantly. Crooked security patch. Same man from the surveillance footage. Same man from the photograph beside the transport van. Jonathan stared at the termination date. 5 years ago. Officially removed from the company. Yet somehow still operating freely inside Whitmore property tonight. Evie slowly looked back toward the elevator hallway behind them. If he's not supposed to work here anymore, she whispered. Then who let him back inside? Before Jonathan could answer, the archive room lights suddenly shut off. Don't move. The voice came out of the darkness before the emergency lights kicked on. Red backup lamps flooded the archive room in slow pulses, turning every cabinet and file box into sharp shadows. Jonathan instinctively stepped in front of the children while Marcus reached toward his jacket. Somewhere near the back wall, metal scraped softly against concrete. Not close enough to see. Close enough to know someone else was still inside the room with them. Lila buried her face against Evie's shoulder. Jonathan's heartbeat slowed into cold focus. "Who's there?" he demanded. No answer. Then another sound. A cabinet door shutting gently somewhere deeper in the dark. Marcus moved first, crossing toward the noise with careful steps. The emergency lights flashed again. Empty aisle. Nothing there. Yet one filing drawer still swayed slightly from movement. Jonathan realized something instantly. Whoever killed the lights knew this archive room well enough to move through it blind. Evie suddenly slipped from beside Lila before anyone noticed. Jonathan turned sharply. "Evie, too late." The girl moved toward the far table where the personnel folder still lay open beneath the flickering red light. Her eyes locked onto something half-hidden underneath it. Another photograph. She grabbed it just as footsteps echoed outside the archive room door. Multiple people this time. Security. Or worse. "Someone's coming," Marcus hissed. Jonathan made a decision instantly. Kill the files. Marcus looked stunned. What? Not destroy them. Hide what matters. Jonathan swept stacks of transfer folders into plain storage boxes while Marcus disconnected the surveillance drive they had copied earlier. Evie shoved the new photograph into her backpack without explaining why. The footsteps outside grew louder. Then voices. "Mr. Whitmore?" "Vanessa." "Calm. Too calm. Are you down there?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. The archive room suddenly felt very small. If Vanessa walked inside now and saw what they had found, everything changed. Marcus quietly slid the personnel file beneath a loose floor panel near the cabinets. Evie caught something Jonathan missed. Lila staring at the photograph hidden in her backpack with wide, terrified eyes. "You know him?" Evie whispered softly. Lila nodded once. Tiny. Frightened. The footsteps stopped directly outside the room. "Jonathan." Vanessa called again, closer now. Security said they lost power on this level. Jonathan looked around fast. Open files still covered half the room. One emergency light flickered violently overhead. There wasn't enough time. Then Evie did something none of them expected. She walked straight toward the archive room door. Jonathan reached instinctively for her arm. "Evie, wait." But the girl shook her head once. Calm. Certain. She grabbed a random clipboard from the nearest table and pulled the archive door halfway open before anyone could stop her. Vanessa stood outside with 2 security officers behind her. Her eyes scanned the room immediately. Sharp. Searching. Evie lifted the clipboard innocently. "We got locked down here when the lights went out," she said before Jonathan could speak. Vanessa's attention shifted toward the child instead of the room behind her. Just enough. Jonathan realized what Evie was doing. Redirecting her. Buying time. One of the guards glanced past Evie toward the scattered boxes anyway. "Looks like somebody's been digging through records." The room froze. Jonathan stepped forward smoothly. "My records," he said coldly. "Unless my own staff now needs permission to enter storage beneath my hotel." Vanessa held his gaze carefully. Too carefully. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced down for half a second. That tiny moment changed everything. Evie saw the message reflected in Vanessa's screen before it disappeared. Transfer moved. Child not recovered. Evie's stomach dropped instantly. Because Vanessa wasn't talking about Lila anymore. There was another child. Jonathan said almost nothing on the ride back upstairs. The private elevator climbed slowly through the hotel, while soft instrumental Christmas music played overhead. Strangely elegant after the chaos underground. Marcus stood near the control panel pretending calm, but his jaw stayed tight the entire ride. Evie noticed Jonathan watching the mirrored elevator doors instead of the others. Not distracted. Calculating. Lila had fallen asleep against Evie's shoulder sometime after leaving the archive level. The rabbit still hung from her hand by the yellow ribbon. Jonathan stared at the toy longer than he realized. Then he quietly held out his hand toward Marcus without looking away from the reflection in the mirror. Marcus passed him the copied surveillance drive immediately. No words. They had worked together too long to need them. Jonathan slipped the drive into his inner coat pocket instead of giving it to security. That detail mattered. Evie saw it. Upstairs, the gala had nearly returned to normal. Crystal chandeliers glowed over polished marble floors while donors laughed beside champagne towers as if nothing dangerous existed beneath the building. Jonathan paused near the ballroom entrance without entering. "Marcus," he said quietly, "pull every contractor file tied to underground logistics. Don't use company servers." Marcus nodded once and disappeared. Toward the service hall. Another decision. Quiet. Precise. Jonathan was no longer reacting to events. He was beginning to move around them. Evie lowered Lila carefully onto a velvet bench near the fireplace. The child barely stirred. Nearby, wealthy guests passed without noticing the exhausted little girl asleep beneath a borrowed hotel blanket. "How do they not see her?" Evie asked softly. Jonathan looked toward the ballroom crowd. "Because they're trained not to look too long at uncomfortable things." The answer surprised even him. Evie studied him carefully after that. Something inside the billionaire had shifted underground. Not healed. Opened. Across the lobby, Vanessa stood speaking with donors near the stage staircase. Calm again. Polished again. But Evie noticed she no longer wore the silver bracelet with the missing angel charm. Jonathan noticed too. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You are asking questions your wife stopped asking years ago." Jonathan's face changed instantly. Small. Barely visible. But Evie saw it. "That message scared you," she said quietly. Jonathan locked the screen immediately. "No," Evie tilted her head slightly. "Then why'd you hide it?" The question landed harder than accusation would have. Jonathan looked away first. Another small thing. Another change. Near the fireplace, Lila shifted in her sleep and mumbled softly against the rabbit's fur. "Train station." Evie leaned closer immediately. "What station?" Lila's eyes stayed closed. "The painting with the blue birds." Jonathan frowned slightly. "What painting?" But Lila drifted quiet again. Evie looked thoughtful now. Not confused. Remembering. "I've seen that," she whispered. Jonathan turned sharply. "Where?" "Penn Station." Evie pointed toward the rabbit. "There's a mural with blue birds near the old bus tunnel." Jonathan's mind moved fast. Rachel had argued with Vanessa near Penn Station. The Albany shelter receipt. Transfer routes. Trains safer than vans. Suddenly the pieces no longer looked random. Then a waiter passed carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes through the crowd. One glass paused briefly in front of Jonathan. Folded beneath the napkin under the glass sat a tiny sunflower sticker. The sunflower sticker had a room number written beneath it in silver ink. 28C. No name. No message. Just the number pressed carefully into the corner like whoever left it knew Jonathan would understand it wasn't random. He looked up immediately toward the mezzanine suites overlooking the ballroom. "Stay with Lila," he told Evie quietly. But Evie was already noticing something else. The waiter who delivered the champagne tray was gone. Vanished too quickly into the crowd. Jonathan moved fast through the gala for the first time all evening without shaking hands or stopping for donors. Marcus intercepted him near the grand staircase. "I traced the elevator logs," he whispered while they climbed. "Archive B was accessed tonight using an executive override code." Jonathan kept walking. "Whose?" Marcus hesitated half a second too long. "Amelia's old credentials." Jonathan stopped cold on the staircase. Around them, violin music floated beneath crystal lights, while wealthy guests laughed only feet away. Yet suddenly none of it felt real anymore. Amelia's access had supposedly been deactivated years ago after her death. Someone had kept her credentials alive underground this entire time. Suite 28C sat dark at the end of the mezzanine corridor. Jonathan slid the keycard from beneath the sunflower sticker into the lock. The door clicked open immediately. Inside, the room looked untouched at first glance. Curtains drawn, lamps dim, a teacup half full beside the window. But Marcus spotted the laptop first. Still warm. Jonathan crossed the room quickly and opened it. Password screen glowed back at him. Before he could react, Evie's voice came quietly from the doorway behind them. The birds. Jonathan turned sharply. What? Evie stepped inside despite being told to stay downstairs. The mural at Penn Station, she said softly. Rachel kept drawing blue birds on the corners of things. Jonathan frowned. Then he looked back at the password hint beneath the login field. Favorite place. Marcus tried Penn Station. Wrong. Evie stared toward the teacup near the window. A napkin sat folded beneath it with tiny hand-drawn. Blue birds inked along the edge. Not the station, Evie whispered. The tunnel. Marcus typed Bluebird Tunnel. The laptop unlocked instantly. Silence swallowed the room. File after file filled the screen. Transfer manifests.
Surveillance stills.
Financial ledgers. But one folder sat pinned at the top. Whitmore Internal. Jonathan opened it slowly. Inside were scanned authorization forms approving child transfers through private contractors beneath the foundation. Real signatures. Real dates. One signature appeared over and over again.
Vanessa Hale.
Another signature stopped Jonathan's breathing entirely. Amelia Whitmore. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. That can't be real. Jonathan's face drained of color. For one horrifying second, the entire story shifted beneath his feet again. Had Amelia known? Helped? Hidden it? Evie stepped closer to the laptop quietly while Jonathan stood frozen. She noticed something neither man saw. The document timestamps. These were changed, she whispered. Marcus leaned in immediately. Metadata flashed along the bottom corner of the files. Original scans from 7 years ago. Modified less than 3 weeks earlier. Jonathan looked up sharply. Someone had altered Amelia's records recently. Framed her. Before anyone could speak, the suite door handle rattled violently behind them. Marcus reacted instantly, slamming the laptop shut as voices echoed from the hallway outside. Hotel security, someone shouted. Open the door immediately. Jonathan's eyes locked onto the dark laptop screen while the pounding on the door grew louder. Then the computer chimed softly on its own. A hidden message appeared before the screen locked again. If you found this, Rachel was right to trust you. The pounding on the suite door stopped all at once. That silence frightened Jonathan more than the noise had. Marcus slowly lowered his hand from the laptop while the locked screen reflected all three of them in pale blue light. Evie noticed Jonathan staring not at the hidden message anymore, but at Amelia's forged signature frozen beneath it. The room suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like every clue from the night had narrowed into this single moment. Then the suite phone rang. Sharp, sudden. Nobody moved at first. It rang again. Jonathan crossed the room slowly and lifted the receiver. He said nothing. A woman's voice answered anyway. If you still believe your wife was part of this, you're looking exactly where they wanted you to look. Click. The line died. Jonathan stood frozen beside the window. Outside, Midtown glittered beneath falling snow while police sirens moved faintly somewhere far below the hotel. Evie watched him carefully. Not broken. Shifting. She stepped quietly toward the desk where the teacup still sat beside the bluebird napkin. Then she noticed something tiny pressed beneath the saucer. A Metro-North train ticket stub. Albany to Manhattan. Dated yesterday morning. Rachel was here, Evie whispered. Marcus looked over sharply. Recently. Jonathan turned slowly. The meaning landed immediately. Rachel had not hidden these files years ago before disappearing. She had been alive recently, inside this very suite, preparing someone to find them. Evie unfolded the ticket carefully. Another detail sat scribbled across the back in hurried handwriting. Not safe inside foundation. Trust the girl. Jonathan stared at the words without breathing. Trust the girl. Not trust him. Not trust police. The girl. Suddenly the entire night rearranged itself inside his head. The photo of Evie from 3 days earlier. Rachel trying to hand Evie the sunflower envelope at Penn Station. The hidden signs only children seemed to notice. Rachel had not randomly crossed paths with Evie before the gala. She had chosen her. Because children moved through the city unseen. Because nobody paid attention to a black girl selling bracelets near subway stairs. Evie slowly looked up from the ticket. She knew they were watching adults, she whispered. Jonathan's chest tightened hard. Rachel had never intended to bring evidence directly to him. She had been trying to reach him through someone nobody would suspect. Through Evie. The realization shifted everything. Vanessa wasn't just cleaning up corruption after Rachel vanished. Rachel had already been moving against them long before the gala began, building a trail designed for Jonathan and Evie to follow together. Every breadcrumb suddenly made sense. The sunflower stickers, the rabbit, the bluebirds, the hidden archive. Rachel had trusted Jonathan's conscience but not his world. That was the difference. Marcus suddenly stepped toward the curtains near the balcony. We've got a problem. Across the street, 2 black SUVs had pulled beside the hotel entrance. No logos. No company markings. Men stepped out wearing dark winter coats, moving with calm precision instead of panic. Not police. Not hotel security. Jonathan recognized one of them immediately, even from 3 floors up. The man from the old personnel file. Crooked Patch. Still alive inside the system after 5 years. Evie's voice came quietly beside him. Rachel wasn't hiding from Vanessa. Jonathan looked down at her sharply. Evie stared toward the arriving SUVs below. She was hiding Lila from whoever Vanessa works for. The scale of it hit Jonathan all at once. Bigger than the foundation. Bigger than stolen transfers. Bigger than one corrupt executive. Then Marcus checked his phone and went pale. Boss, he said carefully. Someone just triggered remote access to the underground archive. Jonathan turned instantly. From where? Marcus swallowed once before answering. From your private executive office upstairs. Jonathan grabbed the laptop before the sentence fully left Marcus's mouth. We move now, he said sharply, already heading for the suite door. There was no hesitation anymore. No pause to process Amelia, Rachel, or the hidden network beneath his company. Someone had entered his private office upstairs while the gala still continued below, and whatever remained inside the underground archive was about to disappear. Marcus moved beside him instantly. I'll call Dana. No police on company channels, Jonathan snapped. Not yet. The elevator ride upward felt slower this time. Dangerous. Jonathan kept checking the dark hallway cameras through the laptop Rachel left behind, but half the hotel feeds were already offline. Somebody inside the building was deleting access point by point. Evie stood quietly beside Lila in the corner of the elevator until she noticed something strange on the laptop screen. Stop, she said suddenly. Jonathan looked down. One camera feed still worked briefly near the executive floor. A man wearing hotel maintenance coveralls rolled a cleaning cart directly toward Jonathan's office. Normal at first glance. Then Evie pointed toward the cart wheels. Red markings. Same color code as the vanished transport van. Jonathan's expression hardened immediately. That's not maintenance. The elevator doors opened before anyone could speak further. Jonathan moved fast through the executive hallway, shoes striking polished marble beneath low golden lights. The gala orchestra still echoed faintly from the ballroom below, absurdly elegant against the panic rising upstairs. Halfway down the corridor, Marcus stopped abruptly. Wait! The office door stood slightly open already. Jonathan never left it unlocked. A faint chemical smell drifted into the hallway. Burnt plastic. Marcus pushed the door wider carefully. Jonathan stepped inside first and froze. File drawers had been ripped open. Hard drives smashed. His desk computer still smoked faintly near the monitor base. Someone had tried to destroy everything quickly, but not carefully. Evie noticed the detail first. They left too fast, she whispered. Papers still scattered across the floor. One coffee cup overturned near the window leaked fresh liquid down the side of the desk. Whoever searched the office had been interrupted. Jonathan crossed toward the hidden wall safe behind Amelia's old framed photograph. Open. Empty. His jaw tightened. What was in there? Marcus asked quietly. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Then, Foundation Donor Archives. But Evie was already looking somewhere else. Near the edge of the ruined desk sat a single untouched object. A child's coloring page folded neatly in half. Strange enough inside a billionaire's executive office. Stranger because Jonathan recognized it instantly. Amelia used to keep drawings from Foundation children pinned inside her desk after outreach events. Evie unfolded the page slowly. Crayon stars, blue birds, sunflowers, and one sentence written in uneven handwriting near the bottom. Mr. Whitmore fixes. Broken things. Jonathan stared at the page like he'd been punched. Lila suddenly stepped closer, eyes widening at the drawing. That girl, she whispered softly. Evie looked down. In the corner of the page, a child had drawn herself beside Amelia and Jonathan outside a train station mural filled with blue birds. Same mural from Penn Station. Same sunflower symbol. Same tiny silver stars Rachel kept leaving behind. But this picture had been drawn 6 years ago. Long before Lila was born. Marcus slowly crouched beside the desk. Boss! He held up something half-hidden beneath the overturned coffee cup. A hotel access badge. Not Vanessa's. Not maintenance. Jonathan took it carefully. The badge belonged to someone still listed as active inside Whitmore Holdings tonight. Chief Financial Officer, Harold Bennett. Then Jonathan noticed the timestamp on the security log blinking across his ruined monitor. Harold Bennett had entered the underground archive exactly 4 minutes ago. Harold Bennett died 2 years ago. Marcus said it so quietly the words almost disappeared beneath the distant ballroom music. Jonathan looked up sharply from the access badge in his hand. What? Marcus swallowed once. Officially, car accident in Connecticut. Closed casket. The room seemed to tilt sideways for a second. Jonathan stared again at the security log flashing Harold Bennett's active credentials beneath his destroyed office monitor. Someone had been moving through Whitmore Holdings under the identity of a dead executive. Evie noticed something before either man did. Lila wasn't frightened anymore. She was staring at the badge with recognition. That's not his real face, she whispered softly. Jonathan crouched instantly beside her. What do you mean? Lila pointed at the photo ID. He used to wear glasses when Mommy saw him. Marcus and Jonathan exchanged a sharp look. Small detail. Huge crack. Whoever Harold Bennett really was, even the company records attached to him might be fake. Then Evie quietly reached. Later, she said. Jonathan took the photo carefully. At first it looked ordinary. Amelia Whitmore during a Foundation outreach event beside children holding art supplies. But Evie pointed toward the reflection in the transport van window behind them. Look there. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Reflected faintly in the glass stood another figure partly hidden behind Amelia. A woman wearing a hotel security badge. Vanessa, but younger. And standing beside her was someone Jonathan recognized immediately once Evie adjusted the angle beneath the office lamp.
Dana Cole.
The detective helping them tonight. Marcus stiffened. No, Jonathan's pulse slowed dangerously. Detective Dana Cole had arrived too quickly at the gala. She already knew Rachel filed complaints. She kept steering attention toward Vanessa but never toward the transport system itself. Suddenly half the night rearranged itself again. Before Jonathan could process further, his office phone rang sharply. Marcus grabbed for it first. Jonathan stopped him. Speaker. Marcus pressed the button. Dana's voice filled the ruined office immediately. Calm. Controlled. Jonathan, if you're with Marcus, leave the hotel now. Silence hit the room. Jonathan said nothing. Dana continued anyway. Vanessa's panicking. That makes her dangerous. Evie's eyes narrowed slowly. Dana wasn't asking where they were. Like she already knew. How did you get this number? Jonathan asked quietly. A pause. Too long. Rachel trusted the wrong people, Dana answered carefully. Don't make the same mistake tonight. Then the line disconnected. Nobody moved for a second. Evie crossed slowly toward Jonathan's smashed desk instead. Her eyes fixed on the blinking security monitor still running emergency logs. She lied, Evie whispered. Marcus looked over. About what? Evie pointed at the timestamp records. Dana's police access ID had entered the underground level nearly 40 minutes before she officially arrived at the hotel. Jonathan felt the air leave his lungs slowly. Not ally. Not fully enemy either. Something worse. Someone moving between both sides the entire night. Then Marcus's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a private security contact. He read it once and went pale. Boss? Jonathan looked up sharply. Marcus swallowed hard. Harold Bennett wasn't buried after the crash. The room froze again. Marcus lifted his phone slowly toward Jonathan. Attached to the message was fresh surveillance footage from Newark Airport taken less than 3 hours earlier. Harold Bennett stepping out of a black SUV beside a private hangar. And standing beside him beneath the runway lights was someone Jonathan never expected to see alive. Rachel Pierce. Marcus locked the office door the second the airport footage finished playing. The soft click sounded far too small against what they had just seen. Rachel Pierce alive. Harold Bennett alive. Detective Dana Cole moving somewhere between both sides. And downstairs beneath the ballroom, hundreds of powerful donors still celebrated inside a building wired into something none of them understood anymore. Jonathan grabbed his coat immediately. We're leaving. No, Evie said at once. The room froze. Jonathan turned sharply toward her. Evie crossed to the shattered desk and picked up the crayon drawing again, staring hard at the blue birds and silver stars. Rachel didn't hide all this just so we could run away. Jonathan's jaw tightened. You're 8 years old. And people keep forgetting I can see things. The answer hit harder because it was true. Before Jonathan could respond, every television screen inside the office suddenly flickered alive. Ballroom live feed. The charity gala downstairs still streamed across giant projector screens while donors applauded near the stage. Then the camera angle shifted unexpectedly. Vanessa Hale stood at the podium smiling calmly beneath the lights. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced smoothly, before tonight concludes, Mr. Whitmore has prepared a very special statement regarding the Foundation investigations. Jonathan's blood went cold. He had prepared no such thing. Marcus rushed toward the office monitors. She's pulling you downstairs publicly. Evie understood first. She wants everybody watching. Jonathan looked toward the ballroom feed again. Security guards quietly repositioned near exits below. Not hotel security. Different posture. Different earpieces. The network was tightening the building around them in real time. Then Vanessa smiled toward the audience and added softly, and we're honored to welcome Detective Dana Cole for her assistance this evening. Dana stepped onto the ballroom stage beside her. Applause filled the hotel. Jonathan stared in disbelief. Not ally. Not hostage. Standing beside Vanessa willingly. Suddenly the power balance shifted completely. Marcus lowered his voice immediately. If Dana's public now, police response becomes useless. Another screen flickered on beside the gala feed.
Undergrund Archive Cameras.
Someone was already inside Archive be carrying storage boxes toward freight elevators. Destroying evidence. Jonathan made his decision instantly. Marcus, get the files copied remotely. Already trying. Evie. But Evie was no longer listening. She had crossed toward the office window overlooking the hotel entrance 3 stories below. Her eyes narrowed suddenly. The red vans. Jonathan stepped beside her. 3 black transport vans had arrived silently beside the service entrance beneath the snowfall. Same red wheel markings. Same contractor pattern. But this time children were being escorted toward them from the lower corridors. Not many. 4. Maybe 5. Small figures wrapped in blankets. Jonathan felt rage move through him for the first time all night. Real rage. Not fear. Not confusion. "They're moving everyone before the files leak," Marcus muttered. Then Evie noticed the smallest detail of all. One child near the back of the line wore a silver star keychain clipped to their backpack. Same cheap dollar store kind hanging from Evie's own bag. The child looked up toward the office windows briefly, then raised 2 fingers against their chest in the shape of a sunflower. Evie's face changed instantly. "Rachel taught them that," she whispered. Jonathan turned sharply. "What?" Evie looked toward him slowly now, understanding arriving piece by piece. She wasn't hiding children one at a time. Her voice trembled for the first time. She was building a way for them to recognize safe people. The scale of it hit all at once. Not isolated victims. A hidden network moving beneath another hidden network. Before Jonathan could speak, Marcus's laptop finally cracked through the encrypted archive servers. One final hidden folder opened automatically across the screen. Internal recovery list. At the top sat 5 names marked active extraction priority. Lila Hart, Evie Brooks, Jonathan Whitmore, Rachel Pierce, and Amelia Whitmore. Amelia Whitmore was never supposed to die in that car accident. Evie said it before anyone else could breathe. The room went completely still. Snow drifted past the office windows while the gala applause thundered faintly 3 floors below. Distant now, unreal. Jonathan slowly turned toward the laptop screen again, where Amelia's name still glowed beneath active extraction priority. Not memorialized. Not archived. Active. His mind raced backward through every clue he had refused to connect. Amelia's credentials still alive underground. Rachel preserving her handwritten warnings. The bluebirds. The hidden recovery lists. The forged signatures modified only weeks ago. And now this. Evie stepped closer to the old crayon drawing lying beside the shattered monitor. "The girl who drew this," she whispered carefully. "She drew Amelia with everybody else who was still alive." Jonathan looked down sharply. The child's drawing showed Rachel, the transport vans, the children, even Harold Bennett hidden in the background. Every figure connected to the network still existed in some form tonight. Except Amelia, unless she did too. Marcus shook his head immediately. "No." The accident was investigated. But even he sounded less certain now. Jonathan remembered the closed casket, the rushed memorial, the board pressuring him to step back from the foundation immediately afterward. Suddenly grief itself felt manipulated. Then another detail hit him harder. Recovery list. Not target list. Recovery. Somebody wasn't hunting these names to eliminate them. Somebody was trying to retrieve them before someone else did. The entire story fractured apart again. Vanessa. Harold.
Donna.
Rachel. Maybe they were not all working for the same side. Maybe they never had been. Downstairs, Vanessa's voice echoed faintly through the ballroom speakers announcing Jonathan's special statement again. Time was collapsing around them. Then Evie noticed something nobody else did. Lila had quietly disappeared from the office couch.
Jonathan spun instantly.
Lila? The suite bathroom door stood slightly open. Marcus crossed fast and pushed it wider. Empty. The window above the sink hung open against the snowfall outside. Jonathan's pulse exploded. No, then Evie spotted movement through the office window below. Near the service entrance, a small figure in pink tights crossed between the black vans holding someone's hand. Lila. And the person guiding her wasn't Harold. Wasn't Vanessa. Wasn't Dana. It was Rachel Pierce. Alive. Real. Looking directly up toward Jonathan's office windows. Jonathan froze completely. Rachel placed one finger softly against her lips. Not a threat. A warning to stay quiet. Then she handed Lila something small before guiding her toward the far alley instead of the transport vans. Evie reacted instantly. She's separating Lila from them. Marcus frowned. Why would she do that? Evie looked toward the recovery list again. Because Lila isn't the child they're trying hardest to find. Jonathan turned sharply. What are you talking about? Evie pointed toward the final name glowing at the bottom of the screen. Amelia Whitmore. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. What if she's still alive somewhere? And Lila knows where? The possibility shattered the room open. Every assumption about the ending died at once. This was no longer about exposing corruption beneath the foundation. No longer about saving children from transport systems. Somewhere inside this hidden war, Jonathan's wife might still exist. And multiple sides were now moving through Manhattan tonight, trying to reach her first. Suddenly, the ballroom lights downstairs went dark. Every screen inside Jonathan's office flickered simultaneously to a single live camera feed from Underground Archive B. Vanessa stood there alone beneath the emergency lights, staring directly into the camera. Then she spoke Jonathan's name softly and lifted Amelia Whitmore's wedding ring toward the lens. Jonathan entered Archive B alone. The underground corridor hummed softly with emergency electricity, while snowmelt dripped somewhere through old pipes overhead. Behind him, Marcus stayed near the freight elevators with Evie hidden beside the shadowed storage wall, exactly as Jonathan ordered. But the billionaire no longer looked like a man giving commands from safety. He looked like someone walking toward the center of his own ruin. Vanessa stood beneath the flickering archive lights, holding Amelia's wedding ring loosely between two fingers. The gold band flashed softly every time the emergency lights pulsed red. "You came faster than I expected," she said quietly. Jonathan stopped several feet away from her. "Where is she?" Vanessa smiled sadly instead of answering. "Not victorious. Tired." "You still ask the wrong question first." The room fell silent again. Filing cabinets stretched endlessly behind them like dark monuments to every hidden thing buried beneath the foundation. Jonathan's hands stayed still at his sides, but Vanessa noticed the tension immediately. "You already know about Rachel," she said. "And Harold." Jonathan gave nothing away. "I know children disappeared through my company, while everyone around me pretended it was paperwork." Vanessa's eyes flickered briefly. A reaction. Small but real. "Your company?" she repeated softly. "That's interesting." Jonathan felt the trap inside the sentence instantly. She wanted him angry, emotional, reckless. Upstairs, muffled applause still echoed faintly from the gala ballroom, as if another world existed directly above them. Vanessa rolled Amelia's wedding ring slowly across her palm. "Do you know the last thing Amelia asked me before the accident?" Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Stop saying accident like it happened to weather." For the first time all night, Vanessa looked genuinely shaken by him. Then she recovered. "She asked me how many children the foundation could hide before the people funding it noticed money disappearing." Jonathan stared at her in silence. Every instinct screamed that Vanessa was twisting truths together on purpose. But mixed inside her words sat fragments that sounded horribly real. Evie noticed something Jonathan didn't. Vanessa never once said Amelia was dead. Not once. The girl stepped quietly from the shadows before Marcus could stop her. Vanessa's eyes shifted immediately. "There you are," she murmured softly. Not surprised. Expecting her. Jonathan moved instinctively between them. "Evie stays out of this." "She's already inside it," Vanessa replied. "Rachel made sure of that." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another degree. Then Evie asked the question Jonathan still couldn't force himself to ask. "Why does everybody keep trying to find Amelia first?" Vanessa looked directly at the little girl for a long moment. The emergency lights flickered again. "Because she took something before she vanished." Jonathan's pulse slowed dangerously. "What?" Vanessa rolled the wedding ring once more across her fingers. "Proof." The word barely rose above a whisper. Marcus shifted near the elevators behind them. Too quickly. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her eyes narrowed slightly toward the shadows. For one terrifying second, Jonathan thought she had realized they were recording the entire conversation remotely through Marcus's encrypted watch feed. But then Evie did something unexpected. She walked calmly toward one of the old archive cabinets instead. "You keep looking at that drawer," she said softly to Vanessa. "Every time Amelia's name comes up." Vanessa froze almost invisibly. Jonathan saw it. So did Marcus. Tiny movement. Huge mistake. The cabinet drawer beside Vanessa's leg was already slightly open. Inside, Barely visible beneath folders, sat another silver star keychain identical to Evie's. And wrapped around it was a faded hospital bracelet carrying one name neither Jonathan nor Vanessa expected the other to see. Amelia Whitmore. Evie moved before Jonathan could stop her. The moment she saw Amelia Whitmore's hospital bracelet inside the cabinet drawer, she crossed the archive room alone and pulled the drawer fully open with both hands. Metal screeched loudly through the underground chamber. Vanessa spun toward her instantly. Marcus cursed under his breath. For one dangerous second, everybody moved at once. Jonathan stepped forward. Vanessa reached toward the drawer. But Evie was faster. The little girl grabbed the bracelet and the silver star keychain together and darted backward before Vanessa could touch them. "Evie!" Jonathan shouted. But the girl already understood something none of the adults had seen clearly yet. The bracelet wasn't hidden like evidence. It was hidden like a reminder, a warning somebody kept close. Vanessa's calm expression cracked for the first time all night. "Give that back," she snapped sharply. Real fear now, not performance. Evie held the bracelet tightly against her chest instead of running to Jonathan. That choice changed everything. "No," she whispered. "You keep acting like everybody belongs to you." Silence hit the archive room hard. Jonathan stared at her. So did Vanessa. Somewhere above them, the ballroom music resumed faintly through the pipes, elegant and grotesque at the same time. Then Evie noticed the tiny engraving inside Amelia's bracelet clasp. Not initials, coordinates. "Marcus," she said quickly. "Phone." Marcus tossed her his cell without questioning why. Vanessa moved immediately. "Don't." Too late. Evie typed the coordinates into the map search with trembling fingers while Jonathan blocked Vanessa from reaching her. The location appeared instantly on screen. St. Catherine's Recovery Center, upstate New York. Jonathan felt the blood drain from his face. He recognized the name immediately. Amelia funded the center privately years ago after a train accident involving foster children. The place had closed suddenly after her death, or what everyone believed was her death. Evie looked up slowly now. That's where she went. Vanessa's breathing changed. Tiny. Uneven. Jonathan caught it immediately. "She's alive," he whispered. Vanessa closed her eyes for half a second like the words physically hurt. Then the truth finally broke through her carefully controlled mask. "She was supposed to disappear quietly," Vanessa said softly. "That was the agreement." Jonathan stared at her in disbelief. "Agreement with who?" Vanessa looked toward the dark archive ceiling instead of answering. Fear. Not guilt. Fear of someone above her. Then the freight elevator behind Marcus dinged loudly. Everyone turned. The doors began sliding open. Harold Bennett stepped out slowly wearing the same dark coat from the airport footage. Alive. Calm. Beside him stood Detective Dana Cole holding a gun low at her side. Jonathan instinctively moved toward Evie and Lila. Harold barely looked at him. His attention locked immediately onto the bracelet in Evie's hands. "That child has no idea what she's holding," he said quietly. "Wrong," Evie whispered back before anyone else could speak. Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. "It's proof you lied about Amelia." Harold's expression changed instantly. "Tiny. Dangerous." Dana stepped forward slowly. "Evie, sweetheart. Give me the bracelet. Sweetheart." Same tone adults always used right before taking something away. Evie saw through it now. The little girl slowly lifted Marcus's phone instead. Not toward Jonathan. Toward the freight elevator security camera mounted above them all. "Rachel said safe people leave trails," Evie whispered. Then she pressed one button on Marcus's phone. The entire archive room froze. Livestream activated. Every ballroom screen upstairs suddenly switched from the gala stage to Archive B underground. Vanessa. Harold.
Dana.
Amelia's bracelet. Jonathan Whitmore. And one terrified black girl standing in the center of all of them holding the final proof while hundreds of wealthy donors watched live above. The ballroom screens above the gala split into dozens of windows at once. Archive files. Transfer logs. Security footage. Children's intake photos cycling across crystal-lit walls while wealthy donors stood frozen beneath chandeliers with champagne glasses still in their hands. The live stream Evie activated had unlocked every mirrored server Rachel built into the foundation system years earlier. Nothing arrived piece by piece anymore. The whole structure surfaced at once. The crooked security patch, the red-marked vans, the underground transfer routes tied to Penn Station and Albany, Amelia's handwritten objections buried beneath modified records, Harold Bennett alive after a staged death, Detective Dana Cole entering restricted levels before the investigation officially began. Even the rabbit's hidden recorder played through ballroom speakers now. Rachel's frightened voice echoed across the hotel. If something happens to me, protect Lila. Guests stared upward in horror as file after file connected into something impossible to dismiss as corruption alone. It looked organized, industrial. Children processed through private transport channels beneath charity funding. Jonathan stood motionless inside Archive B while his entire world collapsed publicly above him. Then the stream shifted again automatically. New footage. Grainy but unmistakable. Amelia Whitmore sitting inside a hospital room wearing the same bracelet now clutched in Evie's hand. Alive. Weak. Speaking directly toward the camera. If this recording is public, Amelia whispered. Then Rachel finally found someone brave enough to force the truth into daylight. The ballroom upstairs erupted into shouting. Some guests pulled out phones immediately. Others backed toward exits. But nobody looked away from the screens anymore. Evie watched Jonathan instead. The billionaire looked less shocked now than shattered. Not because Amelia might still live somewhere. Because she had been fighting this alone while he buried himself inside grief and board meetings for years. Then Amelia's recorded voice continued softly through the archive speakers. The foundation was infiltrated long before Jonathan realized it. They moved children through shell contractors tied to private donor networks. Harold lunged toward Marcus suddenly. Kill the feed. Chaos exploded inside Archive B. Marcus slammed Harold against the filing cabinets while Dana raised her weapon toward the surveillance console. Jonathan moved between Dana and Evie instinctively. But Vanessa didn't move at all. She stood beneath the emergency lights watching Amelia's recorded face on the screens like someone attending a funeral that never ended. You don't understand what happens now, Dana warned sharply over the noise. Her voice shook for the first time. These people upstairs funded half the city. If those names leak publicly, children disappear permanently. Jonathan stared at her. Not denial. Fear. Real fear. Another layer. The network above Vanessa and Harold stretched far beyond the hotel. Then Evie noticed something small inside Amelia's hospital video. A reflection in the window behind her bed. Snow outside. Mountains. And painted on the far hallway wall behind the reflection sat the same bluebird mural from Penn Station. Not identical. Connected. That's not old footage, Evie whispered suddenly. Jonathan turned sharply. What? Evie stepped closer to the screen. The mural changed last year after water damage. Marcus looked over instantly. He knew she was right. Amelia's recording wasn't from years ago after the accident. It was recent. Very recent. Amelia Whitmore had been alive long after Rachel disappeared. Dana's expression changed instantly. Vanessa closed her eyes slowly like the final secret had finally escaped containment. Then the ballroom stream flashed one final alert across every screen in the hotel. External access detected. Files downloading to public servers. Jonathan looked upward toward the ceiling as donors began screaming above them. There was no containing it anymore. And then Amelia's live feed suddenly flickered back on by itself. This time she looked directly into the camera and whispered only 4 words before the signal cut black completely. Jonathan, they found me. The ballroom above erupted before anyone inside Archive B moved again. Crystal glasses shattered against marble floors. Donors screamed into phones. Reporters rushed toward exits while giant projector screens continued flooding the hotel with transfer files, hospital footage, hidden recordings, and Amelia Whitmore's face repeating across every wall like a ghost nobody could bury anymore. Jonathan stood beneath the underground emergency lights, listening to his entire empire break apart overhead, one terrified voice at a time. Then Vanessa finally spoke. Not to Jonathan. To the screens. "I told her not to trust any of you," she whispered. Her voice carried strangely through the archive room microphones still tied to the live feed. Upstairs, the ballroom noise softened just enough for everyone to hear her clearly. Not the board. Not the donors. Not even him. She looked directly at Jonathan then. Years of fear and exhaustion sat naked inside her face now that the performance had collapsed. Amelia found the transfers first. She wanted to expose all of them publicly. Jonathan's jaw tightened painfully. Vanessa laughed once under her breath. Small. Broken. "You think this was about money?" She pointed upward toward the ballroom ceiling. "Those people bought influence through children long before Harold touched your foundation." Harold tried to cut the archive feed again, but Marcus slammed him hard against the filing cabinets before he reached the console. Dana didn't move to help either side. That detail mattered. She only stared at the screens upstairs where wealthy executives began recognizing their own names inside leaked donor records. Jonathan slowly stepped toward Vanessa. "Then why hide Amelia?" Vanessa's eyes filled instantly. Not with innocence. With defeat. Because she refused to stop. Silence hit harder than shouting. The emergency lights pulsed red across Amelia's bracelet still clutched in Evie's hands. Vanessa looked toward the little girl next. Rachel thought children still believed adults could become good again. Her voice cracked softly. That was always the dangerous part. Jonathan looked at Evie then. Really looked. The soaked sneakers from outside the hotel. The silver-taped backpack. The child nobody important noticed until she grabbed his wrist and forced him to stop walking. All night he kept believing he was rescuing someone. But the truth settled differently now. Evie had been dragging him back toward the person he used to be before grief turned him blind. Upstairs, the ballroom feed shifted again automatically. News stations had already hijacked the leaked stream nationwide. Amelia's hospital video now played across national broadcasts beneath headlines carrying Jonathan Whitmore's name. Irreversible. Then Evie quietly crossed the archive room floor until she stood directly in front of Vanessa. Jonathan started to stop her. He didn't. Vanessa looked down at the little girl holding Amelia's bracelet. Neither spoke for a second. Then Evie asked the simplest question of the entire night. "Did you ever try to help them?" Vanessa's face collapsed completely after that. No lawyers. No strategy. No polished answers left. Just a tired woman standing inside the wreckage of choices she could no longer explain away. Tears filled her eyes before she nodded once. Tiny. Ashamed. "Not enough," she whispered. The answer echoed through every ballroom speaker upstairs. Through every live stream still broadcasting nationwide. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, because somehow that confession hurt more than the lies. Then sirens exploded outside the hotel above them. Real this time. Not private security. Federal vehicles flooded the streets around the Whitmore Grand, while guests pressed against ballroom windows, watching blue lights flood Manhattan snow. Dana slowly lowered her weapon at last. Harold stopped fighting Marcus entirely. And Jonathan finally understood the one thing Amelia had tried to tell him for years before she vanished. Looking away had never made him innocent. Evie stepped quietly beside him as the archive alarms began flashing across the underground level. Then the little girl slipped her small hand into his one more time while the entire hotel shook with consequences finally arriving. By sunrise, the Whitmore Grand no longer looked like a luxury hotel. Federal agents moved through the marble lobby, carrying evidence boxes, while television crews crowded behind police barricades outside beneath dirty Manhattan snow. The ballroom chandeliers still glowed overhead, but now their light reflected off abandoned champagne glasses and overturned chairs instead of donors and speeches. Every screen in the hotel replayed fragments of the leaked archive footage on muted news broadcasts. Jonathan stood near the front entrance watching executives escorted out one by one in dark coats with lowered heads. Harold Bennett passed closest to him. No polished confidence left now. Just a tired man staring at the floor while agents guided him toward an unmarked SUV. Harold paused only once. His eyes drifted toward Evie sitting quietly beside Lila near the fireplace. Something unreadable crossed his face before he disappeared into the snowfall outside. Vanessa, left next. She did not resist. She only stopped briefly beside Jonathan beneath the shattered silence of the lobby. She kept believing you'd eventually look down instead of up, Vanessa said softly. Jonathan didn't answer, because he finally understood exactly what Amelia meant. The people disappearing beneath his company had always existed below eye level. In service hallways, transit tunnels, freight elevators, places powerful men trained themselves not to see. Vanessa glanced once toward Evie before agents escorted her away too. The little girl didn't look back. Nearby, Marcus coordinated quietly with federal investigators now combing through emergency backups recovered because of Evie's live stream. The child transfer records had spread too far overnight to bury again. Multiple shelters already contacted authorities independently after recognizing names from the leaked files. Children previously listed as untraceable relocations were being found alive across 3 states before dawn even finished breaking. Rachel's hidden network of signs and symbols suddenly made terrible, beautiful sense. She had been leaving trails for years hoping someday somebody decent would finally follow them all the way through. Then Jonathan noticed Lila watching the lobby doors anxiously. "She's not coming back yet, is she?" the little girl whispered. Jonathan crouched carefully beside her. He wanted to promise Rachel would return safely. Wanted to promise Amelia too. But the old version of him had made too many polished promises already. Instead, he pulled Amelia's recovered bracelet gently from his coat pocket and placed it carefully beside Lila's rabbit. "No," he admitted quietly. "But she made sure you wouldn't be alone while she tried." Lila nodded once like she understood more than any child should. Evie sat nearby silently twisting the silver star keychain around her fingers. Jonathan watched her for a long moment before speaking again. "Because of what you did downstairs." His voice caught unexpectedly. He tried again slower. "A lot of people get to come home now." Evie shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with praise. "Rachel already did the hard part." Jonathan looked at her carefully after that. Not as a child passing through his life anymore. Not as someone he rescued. Something else. Someone who forced him to stop walking long enough to see the truth sitting beside him the entire time. Outside the hotel, morning reporters shouted fresh updates into cameras, while federal vehicles blocked the street. The world had changed overnight. But inside the quiet lobby, another change felt heavier somehow. Jonathan reached for his phone slowly. Marcus glanced over. "Calling your lawyers?" Jonathan looked toward the elevator leading down to the sealed archive level beneath the hotel. Then toward Evie and Lila beside the fireplace. "No," he said softly. "I'm calling every shelter Amelia ever funded." Marcus stared at him for a second before nodding once. Because that answer sounded less like damage control and more like a man finally beginning to understand what fixing something actually meant. Then the lobby television flashed a breaking headline across the screen above them. Private medical facility in upstate New York raided overnight. 1 female patient missing before authorities arrived. The hotel library sat almost completely dark after midnight. Only 1 brass lamp remained lit near the far window where Jonathan Whitmore sat alone with Amelia's bracelet resting beside a cold cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink hours earlier. Snow drifted quietly across Manhattan outside the tall glass panes while the city slowly carried on without asking whether he was ready for it to. For the first time in years, nobody was waiting outside his office door demanding decisions from him. No investors. No attorneys. No reporters. Just silence. Real silence. Jonathan leaned back slowly in the leather chair and stared at the old bracelet clasp reflecting warm gold beneath the lamp. Tiny scratches crossed the metal where Amelia used to tap it absent-mindedly against coffee mugs while thinking. He remembered that now. Strange what grief erased until someone small and stubborn dragged your attention back toward ordinary things. Across the hallway beyond the half-open library door, soft laughter drifted faintly from the shelter volunteers gathered near. The lobby fireplace downstairs. Jonathan glanced out through the doorway. Evie sat curled beneath a blanket on the carpet with Lila asleep against her shoulder, while one exhausted social worker read quietly from a children's book nobody had finished because half the room kept falling asleep. Evie looked up briefly and caught Jonathan watching from the dark library. She gave a tiny awkward wave before returning to the story. No performance.
No expectation.
Just a child making sure another child felt less alone for one more night. Jonathan looked away first. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because of Amelia this time. Because he finally understood the thing he had spent years refusing to see about himself. He had always believed responsibility meant protecting systems, companies, foundations, buildings with his family name engraved across polished stone. But Amelia had understood something different long before he did. Responsibility was smaller than that, quieter. Sometimes it looked like kneeling beside one frightened child instead of speaking to thousands from a ballroom stage. He rubbed his thumb slowly across the edge of the bracelet again. Somewhere upstairs, maintenance crews still removed shattered glass from the gala ballroom, while federal agents cataloged evidence below ground. The world outside remained loud with scandal and consequences. Yet inside the dim library, Jonathan felt strangely still for the first time since Amelia vanished. Not healed, just awake. Then he noticed something sitting near the corner of the library table. One of Evie's handmade bracelets woven from faded blue string and tiny silver beads. She must have left it there earlier without saying anything. Jonathan picked it up carefully. The bracelet was uneven in places where the thread had been tied back together after snapping. Repaired instead of replaced. He smiled faintly despite himself. Amelia would have loved that. Outside the library, Marcus appeared quietly in the hallway carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He stopped when he saw Jonathan holding the bracelet. "Didn't think you were still awake," Marcus said softly. Jonathan looked once more toward Evie and Lila, sleeping beside the fire downstairs, then back toward Amelia's bracelet resting beneath the lamp. 2 worlds somehow connected now by one little girl who refused to walk past someone crying at a gate. Jonathan stood slowly from the chair and slipped Evie's bracelet carefully onto his wrist beside Amelia's wedding band for the first time since her disappearance. Marcus noticed but said nothing. Jonathan picked up his coat afterward and headed quietly toward the sleeping children downstairs. The next morning, Jonathan Whitmore canceled the board meeting without explanation and drove himself to Brooklyn before sunrise. No driver, no security convoy. Just a black SUV moving quietly through streets still wet from melted snow. Evie sat in the passenger seat hugging her faded backpack while Lila slept curled beneath a coat in the back seat beside her rabbit. Jonathan had not spoken much during the drive. But this time the silence between them felt different. Not distant, careful. When they stopped in front of Evie's apartment building, the old radiator pipes inside the brick complex rattled loud enough to hear from the sidewalk. A tired woman stood waiting near the entrance wearing a grocery store apron beneath her winter coat. Evie's grandmother. Her shoulders stiffened immediately when she recognized Jonathan from the television coverage flooding every news channel since dawn. Jonathan stepped out slowly before she could speak. Then he did something nobody around him had seen him do in years. He removed the Whitmore Foundation keycard from his coat pocket, looked at it once, and dropped it into the nearest trash bin beside the curb. No speech. No announcement. Just the quiet sound of plastic hitting metal in the cold morning air. Evie watched him carefully after that. Jonathan crossed toward her grandmother next and handed over a thick envelope. "Temporary housing contracts," he said softly. "Private school access if Evie wants it. Medical coverage for both girls. No press agreements attached. No foundation branding." The older woman stared at him suspiciously. "Why?" Jonathan looked back toward Evie standing near the SUV door. Snowflakes drifted quietly through the early morning light between them. Because she shouldn't have to survive another winter proving adults deserve her trust. The answer settled softly into the cold. Evie looked down immediately like she didn't know where to place something that heavy. Her grandmother slowly opened the envelope anyway. Inside sat apartment documents for a small brownstone in Queens owned privately under Amelia Whitmore's name years earlier. Safe, quiet, already furnished. Jonathan noticed Evie staring at the address. That's where the blue bird mural is, she whispered. He nodded once. Circle closing quietly between them. Then came the second shift. The deeper one. Jonathan reached into his coat and pulled out Amelia's bracelet beside the uneven blue bracelet Evie had left in the library. He held both together carefully for a second before kneeling to Evie's height on the sidewalk. I spent years thinking protecting people meant building bigger walls, he said quietly. Amelia knew it meant noticing who was standing outside them. Evie's eyes watered instantly, though she tried hiding it. Jonathan gently slipped the handmade blue bracelet back onto his own wrist beside Amelia's ring again. Then he handed Evie a small silver key attached to a sunflower charm. The Queen's house is yours too, he said softly. Not because you saved me. Because nobody should have to carry what you carried alone anymore. For a second Evie didn't move. Manhattan traffic hummed faintly in the distance while morning light slowly touched the frozen sidewalks around them. Then the little girl stepped forward unexpectedly and wrapped her arms tightly around Jonathan's neck. Not polished gratitude. Not dramatic tears. Just a tired child finally letting herself feel safe for one breath. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly and held her carefully like someone afraid to break something fragile and important. Behind them, Lila woke quietly inside the SUV and pressed her small hand against the fogged window glass beside the rabbit's yellow ribbon. Jonathan looked up toward the old apartment building afterward, then toward the Queen's address folded inside the envelope. For the first time since Amelia vanished, the future no longer looked like something to survive. It looked like somewhere people might actually come home to. 3 weeks later, the Queen's house smelled faintly of cinnamon oatmeal and laundry detergent instead of marble polish and hotel perfume. Morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window while snow melted slowly along the brownstone steps outside. Evie sat cross-legged on the living room rug, helping Lila tape silver paper stars onto a shoebox they planned to turn into a treasure house for small important things. The rabbit with the yellow ribbon sat nearby wearing one crooked paper crown made from cereal box cardboard. Ordinary little noises filled the rooms now.
Cabinet d'ors.
Running water. A child laughing from upstairs. Sounds so small nobody important would ever put them on television. Jonathan stood at the kitchen counter in rolled-up sleeves burning toast for the second time that morning while pretending not to notice Evie laughing quietly at him from the floor. Part 1 Jonathan Whitmore would have called an assistant before touching a toaster. This Jonathan scraped off the black edges himself and started over without complaint. You're doing it wrong again, Evie said finally. Jonathan glanced over his shoulder. Then come save breakfast. She walked into the kitchen dramatically sighing like the responsibility exhausted her already. Lila giggled softly behind her. Jonathan stepped aside without arguing while Evie lowered the toaster setting with serious concentration. Tiny moment. Tiny surrender. Yet somehow bigger than every boardroom speech he had ever given. On the counter beside the coffee mugs sat a folded newspaper carrying another headline about federal investigations expanding nationwide after the Whitmore leaks. Several powerful donors had vanished before arrests reached them. Rachel Pierce still hadn't been found either. Neither had Amelia. Some nights Jonathan still woke before dawn wondering whether the final hospital message had been a warning or a goodbye. The ache remained, but it no longer hollowed everything else around it. Near the front window, Marcus stood hanging new curtains while pretending not to listen to the children arguing about paper stars. You know, he muttered toward Jonathan quietly, you own 4 penthouses in Manhattan. Jonathan looked toward Evie balancing on a chair trying to rescue the toast before it burned again. Yeah, he answered softly, but this place has people inside it. Marcus smiled without replying. Then came the moment that stayed. Evie carried 3 uneven pieces of toast toward the small kitchen table and froze suddenly near the front door. Someone had slid an envelope through the mail slot without knocking. Plain white. No stamp. Jonathan crossed the room slowly and picked it up. Inside sat only a photograph. Snow-covered mountains beneath pale morning light. A recovery center garden bench near a blue bird mural. Empty except for one thing resting on the bench rail. Amelia's sunflower scarf moving softly in the wind. No note.
No explanation.
Just proof enough to keep hope alive another day. Jonathan stared at the picture silently while the room around him stayed warm and ordinary and real. Then Evie gently tugged the sleeve of his sweater until he looked down at her. "See?" she said softly. "Somewhere warm." The sentence landed exactly where it had begun weeks earlier outside the hotel gates. But everything inside it had changed now. Jonathan looked around the little queen's kitchen one more time. Burnt toast. Silver paper stars. Lila asleep again beside the rabbit. Evie standing barefoot on cold tile floors, smiling up at him like she still expected adults to become better if you gave them enough chances. Snow drifted quietly past the windows outside while Jonathan pulled another chair closer to the table so there would finally be enough room for everyone.